Let's examine a band that formed in 1965 in Los Angeles. They had three musicians. One played guitar, one played drums, and one played keyboards. They had a very charismatic lead singer. And their songs went from the playful to the dark and ominous. Of course, I'm talking about the Doors. This is a band that always seemed to court controversy, but they sold over 34 million albums in the US and 100 million worldwide. So let's open up the door and examine the Doors. Let's drop the needle. The Doors certainly personified the glitz and the dark underbelly of the music scene. And it all started on a sunny beach in California, Venice Beach, when one afternoon Jim Morrison recognizes Ray Manzarek because they both had gone to the UCLA Film School together, the same school that I went to, but not at the same time with them. Anyway, there they are on the beach, and they start talking and realize that they share a love for music. Not long after that, they are joined by Robbie Krieger on guitar and John Densmore on drums. Now, Ray Manzarek plays keyboard, and of course Jim Morrison is the vocalist, and he writes a lot of the lyrics for the band. In early 1966, they started playing in a little club in LA called the London Fog, where they actually were backing up a stripper. Yeah, that's how the Doors started. Well, while they were playing at this club, they started working on songs that would eventually make it to their first album. Later in that year, they moved into the legendary Whiskey A Go-Go, where they became the house band, and as a result, they opened for a number of legendary acts that came through Los Angeles. It was at the Whiskey that they were discovered by Jack Holzman, who was the president of Elektra Records, and he signed them. Less than 2 weeks later, after getting that recording contract, the Doors are fired from their gig at the Whiskey A Go-Go because Jim Morrison adds profanity to some of the songs. It wouldn't be the last time. Then in 1967, they released their first album, simply called The Doors. I like every song on this record, but my favorites are the lead-off, Break On Through to the Other Side, Soul Kitchen, The Crystal Ship, 20th Century Fox, their monster hit, Light My Fire, Backdoor Man, I Looked at You, and the weird 11.5-minute closer, The End. Now, Jim Morrison always thought of himself as a poet, and these songs certainly show that. I remember the first time I heard The End, it was like, whoa, what is this? He's singing about all kinds of stuff, including killing his father and making love to his mother. The album was a huge success. It reached number 2 in the charts, and of course the single Light My Fire was a number 1 hit record. And the Doors also made history by being the first band to have a billboard on the Sunset Strip. Now, Jack Holzman of Elektra Records was going, how can I publicize this album and this band? And he thought, well, a lot of people that work in the music business drive down Sunset Strip. So he commissioned a billboard to be made about the Doors and their album. Now, here's some pictures from a terrific book that show the Doors sitting on top of the billboard. Now, the book is actually Rock and Roll Billboards of the Sunset Strip by Robert Landau. It's a great book. Check it out. To capitalize on the success of Light My Fire in their first album, the Doors returned to the studio and recorded their second album called Strange Days. The album contains some great songs like Strange Days, Love Me Two Times, Horse Latitudes that showcases the poetry of Jim Morrison, Moonlight Drive, and People Are Strange. And then again, there's a closer. Just like The End on the first album, this record closes with the epic When the Music's Over. But not having a number 1 single like Light My Fire that they had on the first album, this album did not sell anywhere near what their first one did. In fact, it is the lowest selling album in the Doors catalog. At the end of 1967, the Doors appear on The Ed Sullivan Show, which was always a big thing for any act wanting to get a lot of exposure. When they rehearsed, Ed and some of the network guys had a problem with the song Light My Fire because Morrison sings we couldn't get much higher, and they think that's a reference to drugs, and it probably is. But the band agrees that they will change the lyric for the live television show. Except they didn't. And as a result, the Doors were banned from ever appearing on Ed Sullivan again. And Jim Morrison made some quote about, "Why do we need to be on Ed Sullivan? We just did it." The Doors continued to tour extensively, and driven by Jim's erratic stage behavior, their concerts got weirder and wilder. At a concert in New Haven, Connecticut, before the concert started, Jim was interrupted in the shower with a female fan by a policeman, and the policeman maced them. Now, this obviously meant the concert was delayed until Jim was well enough to go out on stage. Well, when he got on stage, he was obviously very agitated, and there were policemen lining the stage, I guess for security. Well, Morrison starts improvising a song about a policeman, and of course it's all filled with profanity. So pretty soon one of the policemen jumps up on the stage and demands that Morrison shut up. Well, Morrison takes the microphone, shoves it at the policeman and says, "Go ahead, have your say, sing something." Well, the policeman didn't say anything, didn't sing anything, but he dragged Morrison off the stage and arrested him. And it wouldn't be the last time. Back in LA, the band is working on their third album, which was released in 1968, called Waiting for the Sun. But they don't have enough new material to fill out the whole album. But Jim has written a very lengthy poem called Celebration of the Lizard. And so they decide to record this as a 13-minute song, which will occupy one whole side of the record. The only problem was Elektra Records did not think it was commercial enough to be included on the record. Now, if you open up the gatefold of the album, on the inside you'll see the lyrics for Celebration of the Lizard. The album does contain some great songs, like the hit Hello, I Love You. Now, when Hello, I Love You became a hit, an interesting thing happened. Ray Davies of the Kinks threatened to sue the Doors, and his reason was because it sounded way too similar to the Kinks hit All Day and All of the Night. Now, they do sound the same, but the suit never happened. Besides Hello, I Love You, there are two aggressive songs, The Unknown Soldier and 5 to 1. But without Celebration of the Lizard, there is no long opus to close this album, as they did with their two previous ones, starting with The End and then When the Music's Over. Nonetheless, propelled by the big hit Hello, I Love You, this album reaches #1, and it's the only Doors album to do so. Since their career started, the rock press was following the Doors, and they decided that they would elevate Jim to the status of a rock god. He appeared in Rolling Stone magazine. He appeared on the cover of lots of different rock papers and journals. He became idolized. In March of 1969, a very infamous concert of the Doors happens in Miami, Florida. Jim is heavily into alcohol and drugs at this time, and arrives late, and he is very drunk and very stoned. So when the Doors start playing, he starts slurring his words. Then he starts forgetting some of the lyrics. So finally, he just stands there and doesn't sing. And the Doors are just kind of noodling in the background, playing the music, hoping Jim will come back around. Now, Jim has said many times that he sees these performances as theater. I don't know what besides the drugs was going through his mind at this point. But he's standing there not singing, and the crowd is getting pretty restless and ugly. And so Jim starts taunting them and swearing at them. So some guy from the crowd jumps up and pours champagne all over Jim. Jim rips off his soaked shirt, and the crowd goes wild. So Jim goes, "Yeah, let's all get naked and let's have some fun." And the concert pretty much deteriorates after that. Shortly after the concert, Jim Morrison is arrested, and he is arrested for exposing himself on stage, which the other members of the band deny ever happened. Also charged him with simulating oral sex on the guitarist and for drunken and disorderly behavior, which he certainly probably did. Jim turned down a plea bargain and was sentenced to 6 months in jail with hard labor. The case was appealed, and it was never resolved before he died. In 1969, the Doors released their fourth album, The Soft Parade, and decided to change musical direction a little bit. It is the first album of the Doors to include string arrangements and brass instruments. It did establish the Doors to a pop audience with the hit Touch Me, but the rock press and the underground FM radio stations slammed the record. Besides Touch Me, the album contains Tell All the People, Shaman's Blues, and my all-time favorite Doors song, Wild Child. Why do I like this song so much? Well, it's a great song. But at the end, just out of the blue, Jim yells out, "You remember when we were in Africa?" Really has nothing to do with the song. It's like, where did that come from? But for some reason, because of that line, I just really love that song. Then there is Running Blue, Wishful Sinful, and The Soft Parade. Morrison was largely distracted during the making of this record. As a result, 5 of the 9 songs are written by Robbie Krieger, and this is the first Doors album where the songwriting is credited. The previous albums always said songs by the Doors. After the disaster of the Miami concert and the conviction of Jim Morrison, radio stations started refusing to play Doors music. Jim gained a heck of a lot of weight and grew a beard. Back in the studio, the band releases their 5th studio album, Morrison Hotel. Jim is much more engaged in this one, and it's kind of almost a back-to-the-roots approach, where gone are the string instruments and the brass instruments, and now it's just the Doors playing a lot of blues-flavored rock. The album contains no hit singles, but I do like Roadhouse Blues, Waiting for the Sun, Peace Frog, and Queen of the Highway. In 1970, the Doors released their first live album, and it's a double live album called Absolutely Live, culled from a number of their concerts around the country. You get to hear The Long Celebration of the Lizard. The Doors' last live appearance with Jim Morrison was in New Orleans in December of 1970. Jim was pretty fed up with the whole scene of performing. He has a breakdown on stage and sits down in the middle of the stage and refuses to perform. At that point, the other 3 Doors decide, okay, we're done doing live shows. Back in the studio, the Doors and Jim Morrison work on their next album. It's released in April of 1971. It's called L.A. Woman, and it's the last album that Jim Morrison will appear on. The album contains the hit Love Her Madly and songs that FM radio loved, like L.A. Woman and Riders on the Storm. After the album was completed in March, but before it was released in April, Jim decides he's taking a break from the Doors, and he moves with his girlfriend, Pamela Curson, to Paris, France. Without Jim, the other 3 members of the Doors decide to start work on the next album because they figure at some point Jim will come back and sing for it. But just 4 months after moving to Paris, Jim is found dead in the bathtub by his girlfriend. There is no autopsy done on him, and he is buried in France. The other surviving members of the Doors decide, well, we might as well finish the album that we were working on, so they continue on now as a trio, and they release Other Voices, which is the 7th studio album by the Doors, but it contains no hits, and it doesn't sell. Since they still owe Elektra Records one more record in their contract, they released the 8th and final Doors studio album, Full Circle. But like Other Voices, it doesn't sell, and the band breaks up. Manzarek and Krieger continued to record solo albums. In 1971, the controversial film director Oliver Stone makes a movie about the Doors called The Doors, starring Val Kilmer as Jim Morrison. It's a big hit, but the other members of the Doors, they really didn't like it. From that chance encounter on Venice Beach, to the whiskey, to all the hit records, to all the arrests, to Jim moving to Paris, the Doors certainly had a wild ride. Now, the music and the legacy of the Doors continues to fascinate audiences still to today. I'm going to try now to do something. I'm going to try to link to a YouTube clip of Wild Child so you can hear my favorite Doors song. Thanks for watching, and keep a rockin'. If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.